Imagine a night when an empire's fate balanced on a knife's edge, when Europe held its breath and London did not know whether to cheer or mourn. Imagine one man, awake while a city slept, already holding the answer that kings and ministers were still begging the wind to deliver. His name was Nathan Mayer Rothschild, and before the sun rose on London, he would make a single move that echoed louder than cannon, a trade so precise it would build an empire. Welcome to the Money Codex, where we unearth the hidden deals and quiet decisions that bent history to the will of those who understood money better than any throne. If this kind of story speaks to you, subscribe and turn on the bell. There are deeper secrets ahead: codes, couriers, collapses, and the hands that pulled the strings. Now, step into the storm. June 18th, 1815. The London Stock Exchange sounded like a ship in a hurricane. Paper tore through the air and fell like snow. Voices cracked from shouting. Fortunes slipped across the floor in the footprints of frightened men. Rumors detonated in every corner of the hall. Napoleon has crushed Wellington. No, Britain has won. The empire is finished. Panic made prophets of the loudest liars. At the edge of the chaos, Nathan stood beside a solemn marble column, still as a clock that keeps perfect time. His coat was immaculate, his expression unreadable. His eyes pinned to the numbers as they dropped like hail. Men slammed shoulders against him and apologized to no one. He did not flinch. He was counting something that didn't appear on any board: fear. 2 days earlier, a lone rider had fought rain and mud across a continent and dismounted at Nathan's door with a small sealed letter that had crossed forests, rivers, and battlefields unseen by kings. The paper within carried the weight of a century. Wellington had defeated Napoleon at Waterloo. Britain had won. In a city suffocating on uncertainty, one man knew the truth, and he did not shout it. At dawn, Nathan's agents began to sell. Quietly, then steadily, then with a force that turned heads. Consoles tumbled from their hands like ballast thrown overboard. If Rothschild is selling, the exchange whispered, Britain must have lost. Fear, always eager to be led, followed without asking where. Prices sagged, then slid, then broke their knees on the marble. London, bold, proud London, looked into a mirror framed by smoke and saw a ruin. Nathan waited. From his window, rain gathered on the glass in crooked maps. He could hear the market's pulse through the panes, a frantic drumming that betrayed the confidence of the men inside. He watched as if measuring the fall of coins dropped into a deep well. Noon crept toward the bells of St. Paul's. He turned to his broker, a pale man whose hands trembled at their own audacity. "Buy it all," Nathan said. 3 quiet words, and the world lurched. Agents who had seemed only shadows a minute before unfolded themselves and began to gather what fear had laid down. They swept the floor, they took the panic's leftovers and called them opportunity. The same mouths that had shouted the market to pieces now stood open without a sound. The bells tolled. History took a breath, and somewhere in that breath, the British government confirmed what Nathan had known while the city still slept. Wellington had won. The boards flashed. The wreckage rose. Hats flew, throats found laughter. Men slapped backs they had cursed an hour ago. Losses retreated like a tide, and profits returned wearing laurel. But Rothschild profits did not return. They multiplied. The family's fortune moved not like a man climbing stairs, but like a spark catching a dry field. It looked like genius. It was logistics. Years earlier, while kings had polished speeches and sent envoys to ask the weather for news, the Rothschilds had built a road beneath the road. Couriers on tireless horses, letters written in codes that could be read only when you already knew the answer. Safe houses with shutters that never creaked. Gold that traveled under hay and behind wine, through customs posts that smiled because they had been paid to smile. Information arrived first to a network and only later to a government. In a century that worshipped speed, the Rothschilds owned it. Far away from the cheers, in a cramped coin shop down a narrow Frankfurt street, candlelight licked at stacks of tarnished silver. Mayer Amschel Rothschild, Nathan's father, the architect, Bob the Invisible, sat before ledgers as old as his patience. He had learned the city by its locks and its walls, which doors closed at dusk, which alleys pooled with smoke, which men charged less for a coin that had already changed kingdoms. Twice. He understood that money by itself is only metal. Power is the story money is told to tell, and the direction it is told to flow. He raised his sons to speak that language. Amschel remained in Frankfurt, the quiet heart. Salomon went to Vienna, where the Habsburgs wore ceremony like armor. James went to Paris, where elegance kept a dagger under the tablecloth. Karl went to Naples, where promises traveled by sea. Nathan went to London, where the empire's ink never dried. 5 brothers, 5 capitals, 1 map only they could read. When war broke, they financed armies. When peace returned weary and broke, they financed that too. A victory paid interest. A defeat demanded it. When Napoleon's armies swept into Vienna and Habsburg pride cracked, Salomon sent a letter that rustled like a blade. The emperor bleeds faster than the treasury can replace it. Nathan did not answer with sympathy. He answered with movement. Convoys of gold rolled under hay to the tune of customs officers being educated by silver. Crates were sunk beneath riverbeds at night and retrieved by men who could navigate a current by the taste of mud. The war had its drums, the money had its own. What kings called betrayal, financing the vanquished and the victorious, Mayer called arithmetic. Gold is a patient animal, he told his sons. Let it graze where others are fighting, it will come home fattened. The brothers nodded and wrote the lesson down where only they could read it. Success is a provocation. The great banking houses of Europe had watched the Rothschilds with the overly polite interest one reserves for neighbors who build additions to their homes in winter. Baring in London, Hottinger in Paris, Oppenheim in Cologne, the old pillars began to lean toward one another, whispering bargains in the corners of smoky clubs. They would box the upstarts in, cut their lines to the British market, freeze them out of government favor, let them choose between money and breath. Nathan's answer was the same arrow loosed from a different bow: silence. He moved Spanish gold long before frightened ministers decided they needed it. He secured supply routes that had no signposts and paid guides who did not exist. When the British Treasury reached for funds with the urgency of a drowning man, they found the rope already in his hand. He did not ask for praise or even repayment. He asked for proximity. He wanted to stand where secrets were born, while they were still small enough to fit in a sealed letter. From that day, the Treasury leaned, without announcing that it had shifted its weight. A quiet understanding replaced the loud handshake. Nathan's office received the echo of meetings before the words had quite left a minister's mouth. He never flaunted the access. He treated it like a timepiece he wound at night and wore under his sleeve. The family's power did not swagger. It proliferated. The courier routes thickened like veins under skin. Coders improved their ciphers until even a theft looked like a blank page. The network breathed, contracting to hide, expanding to strike. And with each breath, the suspicion of those shut out grew darker. They called it monopoly. They called it treachery. They called it a web without a spider and decided that was worse. Palaces grew suddenly fond of phrases like public interest. Parliamentarians discovered an affection for speeches against foreign influence. Their words lined up neatly where donations had told them to stand. Proprietors of respectable newspapers found surprise editorials on their desks that possessed by coincidence the very arguments their advertisers needed the public to believe. The old houses had learned a truth as old as trade. If you cannot win a market, accuse your rival of owning it unfairly. In drawing rooms and salons, the whispers stiffened into sentences. The Rothschilds know things before anyone else, almost, as if they see the future. It was not prophecy. It was information that had the popular decency to arrive on time. The difference to those who had always been first felt like theft. Nathan did not explain himself. He did what he had done on the day the bells tolled. He watched, he waited, he measured the room. Sometimes the best answer to outrage is a ledger. That balances at quarter's end. But power attracts a question that never stops asking. How far can one family go before kings decide that crowns must be heavier than coin? The brothers heard it in different cities and different languages. always spoken by the same kind of mouth. Mayer heard it in the scratching of his pen as he closed a book for the night. Nathan heard it in the rain against his window. Not accusation, but warning. Inside a hidden compartment, one known only to blood, Mayer kept private ledgers that did not count money so much as movement. They recorded not what had happened, but how often it had happened before, and what came next when it did. They were part mathematics, part memory, part superstition disguised as discipline. He had not shown them to ministers or kings or even all of his sons, not because he did not trust them, but because he did not trust the world's habit of taking a tool and using it like a weapon. The future has a way of arriving in the hands of whoever runs to meet it. That was the family's creed. Yet now, as their influence braided itself into the pulse of Europe, another creed pressed back. Empires prefer to owe favors to corpses. Rival houses were not just betting against Rothschild trades. They were placing wagers with men who wore swords as if they were pens. Nathan stood again at his window, the city's lamp smudging the wet glass, and considered the problem. You could not be everywhere. You could not be nowhere. The trick was to appear precisely where the next decision would be made, at the exact moment it turned from talk to action. That required errors, other people's. He cultivated them with patience. A minister who underestimated the cost of grain, a banker who preferred gossip to figures, a rival who mistook applause for solvency. He let them reach for conclusions, the way a drowning man reaches for anything. And then he offered wood instead of water. It looked like rescue. It felt like relief. It was neither. It was a bill presented in the calm that follows panic. The family convened in Frankfurt, as they always did when weather gathered. In that small back room where the walls seemed closer, the more money they discussed, Nathan spoke less than his reputation suggested he liked to. James, the most Parisian of them, drew lines across maps with a flair that made even ink look theatrical. Salomon, carrying Vienna's stiffness in his shoulders, turned reports into verdicts. Amschel, patient as a ledger that refuses to lie, caught details nobody else saw. Karl, sunburned from Naples and impatient with slow boats, asked the questions that forced the others to throw away assumptions like worn shoes. They were not kings. They had no army. They did not occupy territory. They occupied moments, those slivers of time when markets imagined one future and money demanded another. In those slivers they moved. The London panic, the rider in the rain, the 3 words spoken at noon, those were not tricks. They were the visible parts of an invisible discipline. Most men in markets believe the lesson of Waterloo is that information is power. The Rothschilds believed a harsher version. Timing is power, and information is only its servant. In the palaces, a question turned into a plan. In the clubs, a plan hardened into a promise. In the newspapers, a promise became a campaign. But in the quiet rooms where the family kept its own counsel, the plan remained what it had always been. Be first, be right, be quiet. And yet, even in those rooms, even among brothers, another question began to breathe. If a family could move the price of peace and the cost of war, if it could lift a government's credit like a curtain or drop it like a stone, what debt did it owe to the stage on which it performed? How much control was too much, even when exercised with care? A family can possess a future so large that it forgets to ask whether it means to live there. Nathan closed his eyes and saw not numbers but roads, and on those roads riders carrying sealed letters through rain that made the world look honest. He heard bells in a city that wanted to pretend it had learned something from fear. He opened, his eyes to the ledgers, to the coin and the ink, and he remembered the only principle that had never failed him. Do not mistake applause for proof. The empire they built did not have borders you could draw on a map. It had edges you felt when events bent around them. It was not declared. It was understood, sometimes resented, often needed, rarely thanked. It arrived early and left late. It saved governments from the ruin caused by their own vanity, and then it made a quiet profit on the gratitude. Some called it parasitic, some called it providence. The word the family preferred was simple: work. The bells of St. Paul's had rung once before when 3 words turned panic into harvest. There would be other bells, other words, other rooms where men mistook volume for vision. The Rothschilds did not vow to win every time. They vowed to be listening when others shouted. This was not luck. It was a design measured in hours instead, of years, in couriers instead of cavalry, in ink instead of iron. And it began, as the largest designs often do, with a man in a crowded room who already knew what everyone else was paying to learn.